Okay, everybody.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we do start, can I get everyone to make sure your doors are shut, your other devices are turned off? I'm going to cover quite a bit of information in a short period of time, so I need your full attention. Also, everyone on this call will receive a copy of this training and the material at the end of the broadcast. My name is Chris Duffield, and I'm an account executive for New Line Mortgage. This class is part of a series of classes designed for loan officers that are either new to VA purchase loans or need a refresher. For about the next 30 minutes, we're going to review a VA appraisal. We'll discuss the different sections and documentation requirements. We'll also discuss how a lender will review the appraisal for not only value but for marketability. A home must appraise at the sales price and meet marketability guidelines as well. Also, before I get started, I would like to take a moment and ask for your business. As an AE, I'm paid commission, so the best compliment you can give me is to send me a loan. If you find this training useful and learn something new, please send me a loan on any product. New Line does offer some great FHA, VA, conventional, and USDA pricing right now. We also have many other trainings available on these other products. And if you have any questions or want additional training, please don't hesitate to contact me. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So under appraisal analysis, the underwriting process includes an approval of the collateral. Not only does the borrower need to qualify for the mortgage, but the property must qualify as well. An independent third-party appraisal must be used to determine the value and the marketability of the home. An appraisal gives a detailed description of the property and how it compares with the neighborhood and recent sales of similar properties. There are a few key areas to review on every appraisal, and I've highlighted these for you in this training. And these key areas are potential issues, and you should start working on them immediately. There could be other considerations, but it's best to have an underwriter review the appraisal so that an overall assessment can be made before you spend a lot of time on the appraisal. So we'll review, I've highlighted, and we'll review some areas that you can work on immediately. Otherwise, this is to get you familiar with the appraisal, so if and when you start getting questions from your underwriter, you hopefully are knowing what they're going to refer to. But there's a lot in this appraisal you're probably just going to leave to the underwriter to review. And what I've done is I've cut and pasted sections of the appraisal in this training. You will receive an example of a full appraisal that you can go through and review when you have time. I've got a full appraisal with all attachments and everything that you guys are going to get. So under the subject section, this starts with the property address and legal description, along with the owner of record, the taxes, the HOA fees, the property rights, assessment type, and if the property is currently or previously listed. This section, you need to make sure you understand everything, all the information in this section. Your property address must match your 1003, your title, your homeowner's insurance certificate, and your purchase contract. If it doesn't match, if all of those three don't match, then get the appropriate corrections made as quickly as possible. The last thing we want to do it right before we're trying to get a file into closing is correct a property address. Your current owner must match title as well. You may want to double check that, because if we have a discrepancy in the ownership, that's definitely an issue. Your legal description must match your title. That's the best way to make sure that the appraiser has appraised the correct property, especially if the address is wrong. Check the condo, PUD, HOA, and special assessments, and make sure that you're counting that fee in your DTI. Hopefully you knew there was a fee. If there wasn't, then of course that could be an issue. If it ends up being a condo, it has to be on VA's approved condo list. And then, of course, check for fee simple. That's a deal killer. If the property is not owned fee simple, VA will not accept the property. The next section deals with the contract. This section describes the appraiser's review of the purchase contract. He must state that he or she must state that he or she did review the purchase contract and list the terms. Must state the sales price and date of the contract. Must state if the property seller is the owner of record. Seller contributions must be disclosed and taken into consideration during the value analysis. So in this section, they'll disclose seller contributions. When we get into comparing this home against other properties in the area, then this information becomes useful. So we'll review that here in just a minute. Under the neighborhood section, this section describes the neighborhood characteristics. So you've got the location, if it's built up or not, the growth, the property values, if they're increasing, stable, declining, what kind of demand or supply are we looking at, what's the marketing time, you've got the price range, you've got the present land use, and you've got a bunch of notes here. So basically, what we're looking for is the neighborhood should mostly be suburban in nature with stable or rapid growth. And the property value should be stable or increasing with a balance in supply and marketing times of less than 6 months. The value of the subject property should be within the price range, and the present land use should be predominantly residential. Okay? So under here, this is a fairly stable neighborhood. We've got a suburban property, over 75% built up with stable growth. You've got property values increasing. Demand and supply seems to be a shortage. So that's good because that means your marketing time is under 3 months. And then you've got your price range over here. Your value should be within the price range. And then you've got the present land use over here, and that should be predominantly residential. Okay? So what we're looking for, what a lender's looking for in this section is the marketability of the home. A lender looks at an appraisal and looks at the marketability of a home with the eyes of, hey, if I have to take this loan back and I have to resell this property, what am I looking at in terms of marketability? You know, am I in a rural area that's under 25% built up with slow growth? And do I have declining values and oversupply of property? It's going to put my marketing time over 6 months. You know, is my range of my property, is it within the range of the homes in the area? Or do I have a property that's way less than the range or higher? You know, if you're outside, if the subject property is outside of the current neighborhood conditions, you may have a lender at that point require another appraisal or a review appraisal. We do run what's called a CoreLogic report on all of our appraisals. We pull AVMs as well. There's other data sources that we use to help us manage the review of the appraisal. And those, you know, those other reports assess marketability as much as value. You know, the lender has to feel comfortable that they're going to be able to sell that home in a reasonable period of time and that it's not atypical for the area. So this is important to review and know. Neighborhood description, read these notes definitely, because a lot of times you will find information in the notes that maybe are not disclosed, you know, up here. So make sure you read those. Under present land use, you know, we do have to have the area predominantly residential. If we've got an area that is going commercial and, you know, we've got a large percentage of commercial use, and perhaps there's notes that state that it's moving more towards commercial, and maybe we're looking at the subject photos and we're looking at the street scene and we see a lot of commercial property around there. If it's zoned residential and the property meets zoning, but we're in an area turning commercial, still, it's not a deal killer, but that's when you may require a second appraisal. They may want to get a second opinion to find out exactly, what we're dealing with. Because they can't cut value, they can't, lower the loan amount. Back in the old days, we used to have the flexibility to do a lot of different things, and we just don't have that flexibility anymore. So how we handle, questions on value and marketability is by ordering second appraisals or desk reviews or field reviews. Hey, and I'll put a bug in your ear real quick. Sometimes we simply require a desk review if it failed core logic or if an underwriter has a question. You always have the option to upgrade that to a full field review if you want. Could come in handy. I had a deal recently where the desk review did not agree with the appraisal, but the field review did. We didn't agree with the desk reviewer's comments. We didn't feel they supported the appraisal, so we upgraded it to a field review, and of course there was other information that was brought out, and we were able to save that deal. So anyway, just wanted to put that bug in your ear. Under the site section, the site is basically a description of the lot, but it also has your information in here like zoning and the zoning description and zoning compliance. Okay, if we've got the highest and best use of the subject property going on, it gives us a description of the utilities, if they're public or private, what are they. This is the section that also determines if we're in a flood zone or not. So the property should be zoned residential, period. It can be R1, R2, R3, R4. I know that zoning classifications vary per county or city, but it does need to be residential zone. If it's zone commercial, that's a deal killer. Zoning compliance should be legal or legal conforming. Okay, should be legal or legal non-conforming. If it's legal non-conforming, we will need a rebuild letter. So perhaps you have a duplex in an area that was recently zoned single-family only. But because that duplex, at the time it was built, met current zoning requirements, it's a legal non-conforming property. It's legal to be there, and we just need a rebuild letter from the city stating that if that duplex burned down in a fire, they could rebuild it as a duplex. That is completely acceptable. Currently, the property should be at its highest and best use. Utilities should be public and typical for the area. If it's not, it has to be common for the area. Well and septic tanks require an inspection. Flood zones must be determined, and adverse site conditions must be noted. So a couple of these things you'll want to look at right away. You'll definitely want to double check the zoning and the flood zone and if there's any adverse site conditions. I would look at those right off the bat and get to work if you find any issues or questions there. Under the improvements, this section gives a general description of the building, the foundation, the building materials, and the overall condition of the subject property. Okay, so here you've got a general description. We've got a one-story detached existing house, split entry, built in 1983. It's 15 years old. It's got some kind of an attic, a scuttle. The foundation has full basement, outside entry, forced air heating, it looks like, central air conditioning. As far as the description of the materials, they're concrete walls, brick and frame for the exterior walls, asphalt, shingles for your roof, gutters and downspouts, window types, storm sash, screens, any amenities, fireplaces, patios, fences, porches, wood stoves. And then you've got the interior, you've got carpet tile, and its condition is good. You've got paint, that's good. Trim, finish is pine, it's in average condition. You've got the bath floor and the bath wainscot. You've got the driveway with the 2-car garage, driveway surface. It's attached driveway. You've got the appliances over here. You got the finished area above grade, 6 rooms, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, 1,132 square feet of gross living area above grade. Okay. Got some insulated glass, and then you've got some comments down here. Okay. So this just gives you a quick idea of the property that you're looking for. Really, where you should pay most attention here is the notes section. Okay, look for references to infestation, dampness, settlement, condition of appliances, condition of building materials, and general maintenance of the property. Pay special attention to the note. The appraiser must describe any adverse maintenance or condition issues. You could see a repair inspection come out of this section. You know, if something is in disrepair or poor condition, definitely will need to take a look at that. Really, that's about the only area of concern is the notes. Okay, so just to recap, it should be noted that the neighborhood, the site, and the improvement speaks to the subject's overall marketability. A lender is looking for obsolete items or issues that make the subject property unique. If the home is too unique for the area, a field review appraisal could be required, even a full second review, depends on what we're looking at. Lenders are concerned about being able to sell a property if they end up foreclosing. So that's basically what we just reviewed, pretty much the first page of the appraisal. Okay, so that's basically what the first page of the appraisal is about, is the subject's marketability. The second page gets into the sales comparison approach. The appraiser must find a minimum of 3 similar homes as close to size, style, and condition as possible to help determine the value of our subject property. These are called comparables. Comparable sales may have attributes or amenities that somewhat differ from the subject property. For example, a comparable could be slightly larger or have 1 more bedroom or bathroom. A comparable could be in better or worse condition. These differences must be adjusted for to help determine the value. The appraiser uses a grid to compare and analyze the subject property to the 3 best comparables found. Okay, so here's a snapshot of the grid that an appraiser uses. And there's some useful information here. You know, basically, we've got a deal up here where the appraiser had 30 comparable properties to choose from that were in the subject neighborhood. They had 91 comparable sales in the subject neighborhood within the past 12 months. So basically they have another 91 properties is what's that saying, another 91 comparables. Okay. Now we're looking for comps within the last 6 months. So we're hoping the appraiser, you know, is able to find the comps they need from these 30. Some of these from the 91 maybe over 6 months. Okay. But this is pretty good. This is a pretty good number to draw from. If that number is low, then that means there's not a lot of comparables in the area. And, you know, that is when the appraiser may need to go to a competing market for comparable sales, either a competing neighborhood or even a competing city. You know, when you get into a rural appraisal and you've got a rural property and, you know, it's in an area located maybe within 30 or 40 miles of another rural city, it's okay to draw comps from there. It's okay to draw comps from there because they're in basically competing areas. At that point, though, it does get a little sketchy because we've gone pretty far for comps. They need to be pretty similar, and the appraiser may even want to go to a couple competing rural areas and, create a larger frame of reference for the lender. The appraiser is not limited to 3 comparables. They can provide 10 comparables, if they feel like that's what they need to do to adjust the value. I don't know how many people really know that, but the more comparables, the better. The better the frame of reference, the better snapshot the appraiser can give the lender. The more data we have, the more information we have, the better the outcome. Typically, while we're on that subject, we're looking for comparables, within a mile. Now, in this particular case, we've got comps over a mile, but I'll show you how that turns out not to be that big of a deal. So comps need to be within a mile, but sometimes if they're over a mile, depending on the area, if it's typical, that works just fine. And I'll show you how that works in just a minute. In this case, this comp being over a mile, and this comp being over a mile, this comp being over a mile, and this comp being over a mile, that's not a big deal in this neighborhood. Okay. Back to the grid real quick. So you've got the subject property and its description here, and then you've got the first comparable, the second, and the third comparables all stacked up next to that, next to the subject property, and you can see the different features and the different data is broken out side by side for an easy comparison. Okay, you've got the sales price listed for the subject property and the comparables. We're looking for the sales price of the comparables to bracket our subject sales price, So we're looking for a bracketing. We're looking for other homes that are worth just a little bit more or less than the property to give us an average. Okay. We're looking for the sales price per gross living area. We're looking for that to bracket. Okay. The appraiser has to list the data source where they found their comparable. I had to block that out because that contained names and phone numbers, but where they got their data is listed there. Sometimes they're knocking on doors. We're in a non-disclosure state here, and that's required sometimes. And then you've got the sales concessions here. So we noted on the first page of the appraisal we had about $5,000 in sales concessions. We've got similar amounts for the comparables as well. And that's the way you want it. They need to find comparables with similar sales concession. If you have, especially if we're looking at a comparable sale and it has a lot more seller's concessions, like $10,000, $12,000, that may not be a good comparable because there could have been an inducement from the seller to the buyer to buy that home. There could have been something else going on. So you want sales concessions to be similar. And then, like I said, we're looking for comparable sales, within the last 6 months. That's our best. Within 90 days is even better, but we'll go 6 months. Okay. All right. And then you've got an area down here where you're typically not going to see too many adjustments. So they take a look at the location, if it's fee simple or not. They take a look at the site and the size of the site, if there's a view or not, the design of the home, the quality of construction, the actual age and the condition. They'll compare all of these characteristics, to these other sales. And typically you don't see a lot of adjustments. In this particular case, we do have a small adjustment for the site because it looks like the lot is smaller is smaller than our subject property. So they have to adjust it. And what they're doing with adjustments is they're bringing basically the comparable back in line with the subject property. That's how they're getting their adjustments. So what they're saying is this comparable would be worth $5,000 more if it had the same site size as our subject property. So, it's close. It's very close. And maybe that'll make more sense, when we get into what we're looking, how these adjustments come into play helps us determine if the comparables are truly comparable. Are we comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges? If we had maybe a much smaller lot, or by contrast a much larger lot, like maybe the lot's twice the size, and now we've got a negative $20,000 adjustment, this may not be a good comparable. That's too much of an adjustment. This is a minor adjustment, and the tolerances for adjustments are typically 5% per line item. So as long as this line item adjustment is 5% or less of the sales price, then that's a minor adjustment, and it's within our tolerance, and we can assume that that's just a small adjustment, and this sale is a viable comparable. Okay, and you'll notice down here, another way to make sure that we're using comparables that are apples to apples and oranges to oranges is your net adjustments down here. So your net adjustments, once you take all the minuses and all the pluses and you add them up, you're going to get a figure down here. In this case, it's $15,603. You divide that by the sales price up here, and as long as it's within 15%, we know we've got a comparable sale. In this case, you can see that it's 7.8%. So we're definitely within tolerances. And then if you just simply add all these numbers together, you'll get a gross number, and you'll divide that by the sales price up here, and you're going to get a gross adjustment, and that needs to be within 25%. So there's three measurements that we use to make sure we're taking to make sure that the comparables are truly comparable sales, that they're enough like the subject property that we're able to determine the value. We may have to make a few adjustments here and there for some slight differences. Like in this case, we've got a little bit larger lot than one of the comparables. You'll notice our subject property has one more bedroom and one more bathroom than a couple of these comps. So it's worth just a little bit more than these comps, except for this one. And then, you've got the gross living area is a little bit larger. So, of course, you've got the adjustments there. Okay. So they do compare the above grade room count and the gross living area. They compare the basement and the below grade area. They compare the functional utility of the home. They compare the heating and cooling. They compare the energy efficiency, the garages, porches, patios, decks, fireplaces. Okay. Those are all items that they compare, they assess a value to, and come up with their adjustments. Hey, one thing to mention about functional utility, you may see that if you're working with older homes. Functional utility is also referred to as functional obsolescence, and that would be noted somewhere in the appraisal as well. That's if, let's say you have to go through a bathroom to get to a bedroom. That's called functional utility. So you have to find comparables that have that same kind of issue in order to get your best value. If not, you could have a large adjustment. Large adjustments will trigger review appraisals or second appraisals. Okay. Other examples of functional utility could perhaps be mother-in-law apartments, or you could have a duplex, but it's actually 2 single units on one lot. Those are all types of functional utility, and if you can't find comps that are similar, then again, it's going to require some very large adjustments, and under that scenario, again, if the appraiser will go out and get 6 more comps, they don't have to use just the 3, maybe go find some more, or we may need a review appraisal or even a second appraisal. Okay, some things to note about the documentation requirements that could result. We've talked about some of this. Okay, a minimum of 3 comparables are required. The appraiser can provide more if needed. Homes in rural areas may require more comp sales. Comparables should typically be located within the same subdivision, at least 2 in a subdivision, and are in a competing market or subdivision. They should be located within 1 mile of the subject property. The sales price per gross living area of the comp should bracket the subject property's value. Sales concessions should be similar. Excessive concessions should be adjusted for. The comparables must be closed sales in the last 90 days. Sometimes, say in rural areas, it's necessary to exceed 90 days, but then more comparables should be provided. Like I said, we could go up to 6 months. And we've really talked about all of this. And then your net adjustment cannot exceed 15, your gross 25, and your line item adjustments not more than 5%. Okay? If adjustments exceed these guidelines, more comparables may be required or perhaps more explanation from the appraiser. Okay? So we basically covered that. More information regarding the sales comparison approach. So underneath that grid of comparables, there's some more information. The appraiser must research the sale or transfer of history of the subject property and comparable sales for the last 36 months. The appraiser should note multiple sales and if they have an effect on the subject property's value. Okay. Comparables with multiple sales in the last 36 months could suggest an inflated value. Additional comparables or an explanation from the appraiser may be required. Okay, you definitely, we typically know if the property is a flip, long before we get to this point, through title, through the agent. But we do use the appraisers, we do use the appraisal to help analyze data when we're maybe analyzing a flip. And a comparable sale that's been flipped is not a good comparable. Lenders feel that the values could be inflated, so they don't like to see comparable flips. Okay, the appraiser must also provide a summary to their report. They must state that they performed a full market analysis and through research of multiple comparables, they chose the best available. They must also state that they've not inspected the property or performed any services on the property in the last 36 months. Okay. So again, there's a lot of notes. You definitely want to make sure you're reading the notes, and then definitely want to come down here and make sure that your value meets, is going to work for the transaction, and that your appraisal is subject, or is as is, or subject to completion per plans and specs, or subject to repairs. Okay. Now, if the value comes in less than the sales price, your borrower can come in with the difference. They would have to come in with that difference with their own funds. The value of the property can be disputed by providing additional comparables. So if the value comes in low, we can go back to your agents and have them give us some more comparables that we can submit to the appraiser and see if we can get that value up. And really the sales comparable approach is the only approach that we consider when determining value. There's other ways to determine value using a cost approach or an income approach. VA does not consider those. Okay, so there are several addendums and exhibits that must be included in the appraisal. And I wasn't going to, but I think real quick, I'm going to pull up an appraisal here. All right. So here's an appraisal, and I've just gone through and we just have reviewed the first couple of pages. But I'm going to kind of scroll through the entire appraisal so that you can see all the different addendums and how they apply. So we've gone through all this information. It looks exactly as my cut and paste. Okay. So once you get past the first 2 pages, then there's a whole, I'm not sure why this keeps doing this, sorry guys. There's a whole nother page that they can use just for comments. And it also gives information for the cost approach. The cost approach would be how much, if we had to rebuild the home today, what would it cost? That's what the cost approach used to be. The income approach is based off of what kind of income could be earned off the property if it were, an income producing property. But neither of those apply. Okay. And then you've got the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report. Then you've got all these other addendums, the scope of work, disclosure that the appraiser must provide. Okay, these must be provided on every appraisal, and your appraiser will do that. You typically don't have to worry about addendums. I can't remember the last time I had a condition for an addendum. Especially on a VA appraisal, you guys, VA appraisers are held to a little higher standards than even FHA and conventional appraisers. There are not, not every appraiser out there is eligible for VA. So we don't see a lot of conditions on our VA appraisals. They do have fewer. I did confirm that with underwriting. The photos. So the photos are a great source for you guys to go in and make sure that maybe there's something on there that the appraiser didn't mention. A for rent sign on a subject property, that's a big deal because on VA loans we're doing owner occupied only. And if there's a for rent sign sticking out there, that may or may not be a big deal. It depends on what the current owners are doing with the property. But if it's under contract, maybe it shouldn't be, up for rent either. So anyway, those are some things that we find when we're looking at subject photos, the front and the rear. We look for repair items, things that weren't mentioned in the appraisal. So look closely yourself and know that if you're going to have a question, like if the shingles look like they're peeling on the photos, but the appraiser didn't mention anything in the body of the appraisal, if you're questioning it, the underwriter is probably going to question it and may require a roof inspection. Street scenes are great for determining what's around the home and if it's in an area that's marketable. So I mentioned an example earlier, looking at a street scene, maybe there's a 7-Eleven or a grocery store or something adjacent to the subject property, and that was never mentioned in the appraisal. That's kind of a big deal. Your comps are going to have to be, located in a similar area. So street scenes provide great information. And then, of course, we have to have all the interior photos. And, this often brings up repair items. I had an appraisal recently where the borrowers were an elderly couple. I think it was pretty obvious they needed some help in their life. And we did an appraisal. And every single room, except for a couple of rooms upstairs, it was pretty much hoarder style, where, I mean, you just had tons of boxes and clothes and stuff and things. I mean, there were literally trails, you know, going around, and you had what looked like to be water damage, you know, next to the furnace and next to the drain for the water, and kids' toys, and just like all this, you know, all this stuff. And it gave the underwriter a pretty bad impression of the property. And, you know, the underwriter required quite a few inspections, including inspections regarding that heater and the leaking water and whatever. And you know, there was really no way around getting the inspections. What the loan officer ended up doing is pitching in for a 1-800 got junk truck, I think, and they went in and cleaned out the house and basically just gave it a good clean and retook the photos, and come to find out really the only thing that needed repaired were some shelves in one of the storage closets, and you know, the underwriter couldn't even see in there. They had no idea, you know, that those shelves needed repair, but pretty much nothing else needed repair. So, you know, they took an interest, they cared, they went in, you know, I was really proud, you know, the loan officer and the realtor really took on becoming the eyes of the lender and said, okay, we get it, we know why you're questioning this, it's not as bad as it looks, let's get it cleaned up and handled. You know, and they did it, and they went the extra mile, and the deal worked. So photos are a big deal. Make sure you're looking at them. If you have questions, we're going to have questions. You know, we're all looking at this. Well, we're not always all looking at this from the same point of view, but you should all be looking at it from the lender's point of view. All right. So you've got all the interior photos. You've got the building sketch. Okay, this is required. This gives you an idea of the layout. And this could, you know, this is where questions like maybe the functional utility piece comes in. You know, maybe the floor plan shows a bedroom or a bathroom, you know, tucked behind, shows a bathroom tucked behind some bedrooms or something. You know, something kind of funky that wasn't addressed in the appraisal. But that gives you an idea of the floor plan and the functionality. And then we've got comparable photos, so the appraiser is supposed to provide comparable photos. Some interesting things can come out of your comparable photos. For sale signs, for example, if the comparable is for sale, then it's not a sold listing, and we cannot count it as a comparable. Address numbers. So we have caught errors where appraisers have provided the wrong comp photo. They had the address listed, you know, in the grid, and then we look at the number on the house and it's completely different. So those are a couple of the more obvious. Here is basically a site map. Gives you an idea of the size of the site, you know, just a quick visual idea of the size of the site and how it compares to the neighborhood. And then we've got a market conditions addendum here that goes into a lot more detail regarding the market conditions. You've got VA's addendum. And again, you're going to get a copy of this, so you can go through this in a lot more detail. And you've got all these definitions, pages and pages of definitions, all the little codes the appraiser used, etc., abbreviations. They're all defined here. And by the way, you know, your borrower should be getting a copy of this appraisal and be able to take the time and go through it like we're going through it today. You may even want to consider as kind of a service to sit down and go through the appraisal with your borrower. Okay, so here's the deal with the area map. So the appraiser has to provide an area map to show where the comparables are in relation to the subject property. So as you can see, this is in West Jordan, which is a pretty big municipality, and it's easy and common to go or to exceed a mile when looking for comps in this particular neighborhood. So that's why those comps being over a mile were not a big deal. Now, if we had comps down here in South Jordan or over here on the other side of the freeway in Mid-Bell, that's a different story. Okay, and then, of course, the appraiser has to include a copy of his license and errors and omissions insurance. All right, you guys. Well, that is it for today. I appreciate your time. If you found this training useful, please send me a loan. Contact me with any questions. You can call me at 759-8521 or email me at kduffield@nlmtg.com. Thanks and have a great day.